want you to do something a little bit more sophisticated than what I just showed you. The basics of how to actually do or integrate Java with Python are still true for this. That is, you need library references to essentially run the program, and you need the Jython jar. So it allows that integration between Java and Python. But to do something more sophisticated, we need even more jars. In this case, we're going to create an application that uses Java kinds of functionality to display information. In this case, the information is about our name. So it's a kind of hello world in a way application. It's different ways to show your name. One is showing your name in the console. Another way is to put your name into a kind of a frame, a GUI frame. So if you're creating a GUI application. And finally, a way to speak your name. So I'm going to show you all three. Now this will be a good way to show you how to set up a Jython run. So if we add again the jars, so this time we need jars from a different package. So we just added the stats before. Now we're going to add jars from this so-called frets package. This is a package that allows us to have some additional Java functionality. Essentially a library that allows things like voice to be activated. So voice is not something part of the standard Java library. So we have to add these jars so we can use the voice functionality, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to add those jars, and there's going to be some other jars I perhaps want to add. So I think these two are going to be necessary, so we'll add them, and we're going to apply them once again. So notice that I've added them to the PyDev or Python path, going to the external library. So they're essentially within Python, but they're jar files accessed by Python. Now Python and Jython, or excuse me, Jython, that is the Java version that integrates Java with Python, or Python, is over here. You can see Jython run is part of the standard PyDev application. So we can create a new Jython run. In this case, it's going to reference hello world, and then we're going to reference this frame within the src folder. So if we go to frame, and then we go to the main methods, or excuse me, the main different module here. So that'll be the module that we're going to use for the run. And you can see that it has all the references to jar, the jar files that this is coming from what I did earlier. That is the actual project reference to the jar file. So the jar again is compiled Java code. So it has references to compiled Java code, the jar files, and those will be used then within the application run. I do need to create a specific argument for this. So in this case, Java is expecting that I need some input information coming from the run. The input is my name, Mark, and then it also needs the user interface. Let's say console. Okay, so I'm going to use this. Let's save that for a second. Oops, I should probably get rid of this one. This is an old one I had. Make sure I spell console correctly, and we're going to apply this, and let's just test it to make sure it runs. So save it. So we're running it using Jython. I'm just going to run it real quick just to make sure it works. You can see Java just got uploaded, and you see something called Hello Mark. So we saw Java essentially being uploaded, and then Hello Mark running. Now I want to show you again just that real quick. So the way I did that was going to Jython run, and I created a new Jython run. I didn't really give it a name. Maybe I want to give it a name, so main run perhaps. And then you can see the Python path variables, that is the jar files, the compiled Java, and then the argument I used to sort of which will be the program we'll use, and I'll show you the code why it requires that in a second. So that's one output. The second output is a window, and this window should create a kind of GUI. So hopefully it'll do that in a second. we see Java launching, and there it is, hello Mark. So instead of hello Mark in the console, now you see it in a GUI. It's just a GUI with a green kind of color, a green frame, and a click me button, which does something. So I'm going to press click me, and it just says click. So nothing really fantastic, but it shows you a Java-based frame. So this is a Java GUI that's created from Python. Okay. Now I'm going to do the third thing, which is Java has this this reason why this libraries that I added earlier from this frets it has this kind of voice capability. So far what I used was coming from the standard Java libraries, the GUI, the console printing. But now I want to use this this voice thing, this voice tool, which is coming from another library, another Java library, similar to how statistics or stats was a library that I created. So I'm referencing another library, something outside of the main Java set of libraries through the jars that are in this Python path. And so this time I changed the input to voice, so it should say something to me. I'm going to up the volume. Hopefully it'll say something about my name or something, and we'll hear something hopefully in a second. Nope, it did it wrong. Okay, so it's telling me that the input is actually called speech. So it says valid UIs, and it has 3 options, and one of them is speech. So I just forgot the name of the input that has to go in there. So I'll just simply change that to speech rather than voice. It's good to have these reminders.
Hello, Mark. My name is Hal. Do you want to go on a spaceship with me?
Okay, so that was basically a voice saying hello to me and some other stuff. So it gives you an example of different kinds of ways in which my name was displayed on a console, in a window frame, in a GUI, as well as through voice. So how do we do all this? What is happening basically? And that's part of the assignment today, is I want you to figure that out. And you can see the code. I didn't actually comment it very well, or actually almost nothing. And that was on purpose because I want you to figure out what's going on and comment it. But to do that, we're going to have to do some, what I would suggest is debugging. And remember, adding a breakpoint is a way to do that. So we add breakpoints to the code. This is in main.py, which is under frame package in Hello World. And parser is a Python parser. It's a standard part of the library. You can see I reference it up here. And once again, we're having, unfortunately, slightly issues with PyDev, but it's nonetheless working, as you can see. And it should take a way to parse input going into Python. So remember those inputs I created in the Jython run. So in this case, it's these inputs. Those will be parsed up into this by this parser. This UI you can see being parsed, for instance, here. Language, I can add a language flag as well if I wanted to. It's English as default. I could have added a -- lang if I wanted to change language potentially. So in any case, the default here is that we can begin to see what's happening. We can debug it, and we're going to run it. So we're using a standard library within Python, so this is not something we created, to parse the code, and then we're going to see what's happening to the code as we go through it. And from that, we should be able to deduce what is generally happening in this, how it's doing the functionality that's possible. So you can see parser being called, or the variable parser, which is basically referencing a class, an object called our option parser. So you can see it's referenced here. And it has in parser a number of variables within it. So you can see it's a fairly large, somewhat large object that's created from Python. And what it does, if you read the libraries, we don't have time to do it now, but if you go into the Python documentation, you'll see that it has this ability to sort of break the code, to parse it, and create options for us. These options will allow us to do a number of functionality. So it takes the input that we've created, the UI, the mark, and other things, and allows us to do something with those inputs. So UI and lang being among the 2 inputs that are used. So what we should see then are some options within parser. hopefully. If we look inside of it, we want to know what's inside there. And you can see console, lang, en. So these are some of the inputs that are in there. So it's created a dictionary for us with these kinds of inputs. And that gives us some arguments. And then we can get those arguments out of it once we've parsed them. So we parse those inputs, and we have something called options, and we have something called args. And these two both are referencing important things. So we have args referencing the name, and options giving us things like the user interface, the speech, the language, and that kind of dictionary references that you see there. And then you're going to go through the code, and at this point you should be able to hopefully figure out what's actually happening. So if the length of the argument is less than 2, then basically it's not working. That is, you failed to provide proper input. But if it is not less than 2, then potentially it's okay. So you see this try application. It's going to go to something called hello. So hello was created up here. It's referenced in the library. So it's something that's actually within the application. It is not an object, but you can see it goes right to a method called hello. It's a little bit off, it looks like. And then it goes through hello into this greet method. And it looks for the language interface and a language that's going to be used. And you can see the default language is English, EN. And so it'll sort of skip that and then go to the message. So if we step into this, we can see what's actually happening in the code. And then we can begin to sort of determine what the inputs are actually doing. So I'm not going to do that now because that's something you already learned last week. But I'm going to show you an important thing that will help you understand this code. So let's skip to one of the classes that's going to be done, the window. The window, if you recall, is the actual GUI that we used, the user interface. So one of these things, if you notice, is that it's doing a number of things. A lot of it here is actually Java. These are all Java references, what's called Java Swing and AWT. That's are used for GUI construction in Java. And here is some Java code. JFrame is a Java frame, and JText area, that's a Java text. All these are created. Now, how would I know what these actual values should be? So what you do is go to the Java docs, and you could look at them, and you could begin to see what kind of inputs are done to create these text areas. So if you're designing a GUI using Java, you simply use the Java doc to design what you have to do. So you don't have to really know the Java code, but what you do have to know is what kind of inputs are required to use the Java properly. So as an example, so we had the GUI for math before. Now let's say I want to go with JText area, okay? And you can figure these things out by going to the main Java Swing library, and as well as the AWT. So if you go to the libraries, you can figure out the Java docs, and I'll show you that in a second. So JText area, you can see, has a Java doc, and it again lists how you go about creating it. It has the constructors. We talked about constructors before, and you can see constructors reference different inputs that can then be used to create the text area. So that's one way of knowing, is using the Java docs. Let's say we didn't necessarily know what to use. So we know that Java Swing perhaps has a kind of sort of library, but we need to use Java docs to sort of figure it out. So what we do is look at the Java docs again at the higher level. So in this case, we're looking at Java docs for the specific library reference, Java Swing, and you can see the classes in there as well as interfaces, and that's how you can find the specific class. So JText area should be referenced within that, and so we look at it there. So it's one of these things where you have to know something about the Java application, a little bit more than just know knowledge, to know how to use it. It's not so much critical for today's lesson what I'm doing within the Java code. I don't really care too much about that. What's critical is you recognize the difference between Java when it's being used and Python, and then how do I actually use the Java code. That is, I'm actually using it as if it is Java code, but giving it Python inputs. So that means I have to know what the Java requires, but give it specific Python values that are comparable and or equivalent to what it requires. Okay. So if the JText area requires a string, then I give it a Python string. So even though it usually has a Java string. In this case, I'm going to give it a Python string. And so that's one way of doing it. A Boolean. So once again, Booleans are used as a way to give true-false responses. Java has a specific Boolean variable. Remember, in Python, we don't have necessarily distinctly defined variables, but they are distinctly defined when you input them in a certain way. So for instance, if I say something is false like this, false is a keyword in Python, and so I can then use it as an input to reference editable, excuse me, as false. So that's how I would go about doing that. Same thing with wrap style word. So these are inputs that are required so that I can give them specific value inputs using keywords. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. So this is all kind of using a combination of Java and Python to do some of these kinds of applications. So if you go through that, you'll see that it's more or less using the same logic as you would if you were creating this in Java. You were also creating the panel. You're creating different functionality within the panel. You're adding the green values, so the background color that you saw, the green. I'm adding a button, click me, and this button is going into that panel of the frame, and then that is all being set up. It's being packaged, and it's also visible, set to true. So I'm using a combination, mostly Java kind of styles of flow of arguments, but it's with the equivalent of Python commands. So you give it the Python commands, but you use the words, the keywords, the inputs that are Python equivalent. Okay, so that's the key thing to keep in mind. And you can use the debugger to go through this if you want to understand how this is done. The other key thing is that you notice this thing, register _UI. This is a nice way